In Cold Blood is a non-fiction crime novel written by the American writer Truman Capote. It was first published in its full form in 1966 and details the murder of the Clutter family in their home in the small farming village of Holcomb, Kansas, in November 1959. The work is significant not only due to its success and its reconstruction of a brutal murder case that swept up and shocked the whole of America, but also because of its genre and style. Truman Capote is considered to be one of the pioneers of new journalism, an American literary movement that developed during the 1960s and 70s, which blurred the boundaries between journalism and fiction. Writers of this movement would gather facts through field research and interviews and manifest them in writing that used fictional stylistic elements such as character development, vivid descriptions, and dramatic tension. This writing style can also be seen in Cold Blood. Indeed, before being published as a book in 1966, In Cold Blood was originally serialized as a series of articles in The New Yorker, an American magazine featuring journalism, essays, satire, and cartoons. As mentioned earlier, In Cold Blood reconstructs the violent and horrific murder of 4 members of the Clutter family in their home in Kansas. On the 15th of November 1959, Herb Clutter and his wife Bonnie and their teenage children Nancy and Kenyon were murdered in their home in Holcomb, Kansas. 2 men, Perry Smith and Richard Hickok, who had only been released on parole shortly before, were found guilty of the murders and executed via hanging on the 14th of April 1965. The 2 convicts had planned on robbing Herb Clutter's safe after hearing from a fellow inmate that it contained a large sum of money. They ultimately found that Herb Clutter had no safe and ended up killing the family to ensure no witnesses. In Cold Blood is structured into 4 parts. The Last to See Them Alive, Persons Unknown, Answer, and The Corner. In this video, we will look at some sections from the first part of the work and explore how Capote stylizes the facts of the case with fictional elements in order to draw strong reactions from his readers. The first part of the work begins with an extensive description of the case's key setting, Holcomb. Capote describes the quiet village of Holcomb as standing on the high wheat plains of western Kansas, a lonesome area that other Kansans call out there. He ends his description of Holcomb and its residents with the following passage. At the time, not a soul in sleeping Holcomb heard them. 4 shotgun blasts that, all told, ended 6 human lives. But afterward, the townspeople, theretofore sufficiently unfearful of each other to seldom trouble to lock their doors, found fantasy recreating them over and over again. Those sombre explosions that stimulated fires of mistrust in the glare of which many old neighbours viewed each other strangely, and as strangers. By juxtaposing the facts of the 4 shotgun blasts that killed the 4 members of the Clutter family with a vivid description of the psychological and emotional impact they had on the village of Holcomb, Capote immediately clarifies one of his key intentions: to tell us not only what happened, but also to give us a psychological insight into the human impact the case had on those involved. Capote continues to use juxtaposition to consistently draw contrasts between the victims and murderers in the first part of the novel. He describes Mr. Clutter's morning routine on the day before his murder in the following way. That morning, an apple and a glass of milk were enough for him. Because he touched neither coffee or tea, he was accustomed to begin the day on a cold stomach. The truth was, he opposed all stimulants, however gentle. He did not smoke, and of course, he did not drink. A couple of paragraphs later, we are presented with our first description of one of the murderers, Perry Smith. Like Mr. Clutter, the young man breakfasting in a cafe called the Little Jewel never drank coffee. He preferred root beer. 3 aspirin, cold root beer, and a chain of Pall Mall cigarettes. That was his notion of a proper chow down. Starting with the phrase, like Mr. Clutter, Capote highlights the sharp contrast between Herb Clutter and Perry Smith, the former who opposes all stimulants and the latter who only has stimulants. By drawing such contrasts, Capote is not necessarily and simply highlighting that one is bad and one is good, but is rather creating a sense of discomfort, as we are forced to compare the characteristics of the two men while also remembering that in reality, in the real world, one has already murdered the other. The contrasts continue with Nancy, Mr. Clutter's 16-year-old daughter. Capote describes Richard Hickok repairing his car with Perry before their long drive to Kansas to commit their crime. At noon, they put down their tools, and Dick, racing the engine, listening to the consistent hum, was satisfied that a thorough job had been done. Directly in the next paragraph, Capote describes Nancy helping a young girl bake a pie. Nancy and her protégée, Jolene Katz, were also satisfied with their morning's work. Indeed, the latter, a thin 13-year-old, was agog with pride. For the longest while she stared at the blue ribbon winner, the oven-hot cherries simmering under the crisp lattice crust, and then she was overcome and hugged Nancy. Capote deliberately uses the adverb also, and the same adjective, satisfied, to describe Richard and Nancy's feelings about their work. Of course, the former's work is to prepare for a robbery, while the latter's work is to help someone bake an excellent pie. This direct contrast between victim and criminal ties them visually and physically close together in a tight and suffocating narrative space that helps to spark deep sympathy from readers. Although we were only able to briefly look at a few short examples from the first part of Capote's work, they are sufficient in highlighting not only Capote's captivating style of blending real people and facts from the real world with writing styles typical of fictional writing, but also his aim of wanting to discomfort readers and spark deep empathy. It is a work that questions the nature of both journalism and fictional writing, as well as one that forces us to realize how intricately related real events and experiences are with the way in which we understand fiction in a more raw and direct way.